So today we're going to look at part 2 of our Constitution PowerPoint. And this video today is going to cover um, remind you of the strengths of the Constitution, and then we're going to talk about basically the first political parties, Federalists and Anti-Federalists, and we'll talk about something called the Federalist Papers, and then we'll look at 6 big ideas from the Constitution. So, just as a reminder, we'll start off by looking at this slide. This was the last slide on yesterday's video, or the last video. And some of the strengths of the Constitution were, number one, that most of the power was held by the national government. Number two, 3 branches of government. So we had 3 branches of government, and those branches are 3, 4, and 5. We had a legislative branch that has many powers. We had the executive branch that was led by the president. Then we had the judicial branch that reviews laws. And number 6 is maybe the most important, is that there was a firm system of checks and balances within each one of these branches. And that system of checks and balances helped make sure that not one branch of government became all-powerful or more powerful than all the others. With that said, let's look at the 2 groups of people that were really kind of vying against each other as the Constitution was being written. Both of these groups of people wanted what they thought was best for the country. Ultimately, the Federalists end up winning out. They were nicknamed the Federalists because they were basically in favor of federalism, the idea of sharing. If you remember from our vocab from the previous video, from part 1 of this video, the idea of federalism is that you share power between a central government and the states. So Federalists supported the Constitution. Okay, they're the ones that, most of them, that wrote the Constitution. They wanted more power for the central government. Federalists tended to be, well, let's look at Anti-Federalists as well. This is going to be a compare and contrast slide. Federalists supported the Constitution. Anti-Federalists tended to oppose the Constitution. They were much more in favor of power for the states and less power for the central government. Okay, now Federalists tended to be wealthy farmers and lawyers. So these were people that were had huge farms. They were lawyers. They were business owners. They tended to be a little bit on the wealthier side. Okay, the Federalists wanted to protect the rich class. The Anti-Federalists tended to be small farmers, and sometimes they were debtors or indentured servants even. And the Anti-Federalists were much more down-to-earth, everyday people that you would likely know if you were living at the time. Some of the most famous Federalists included George Washington, Ben Franklin, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay. Some of the more famous Anti-Federalists that you probably have heard of included George Mason and Thomas Jefferson. Now, this is just basically an overview of Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Just keep that in the back of your mind, and you want to know for the quiz what's on these slides, but keep it in the back of your mind because down the line we're going to talk about the nation's first political parties, and you're going to hear these terms again, Federalists and Anti-Federalists. And some of the names that you see at the bottom of the slide, you're going to see again. Now, we're going to talk about the Federalist Papers. Now, these papers were basically essays that were written to support the Constitution. When the Constitution first came out in 1787, it had to be ratified by every state. And there were some states that hesitated to ratify it. Remember the word ratify, if you remember from your scavenger hunt last week, the word ratify means to officially approve. And all 13 states had to officially approve or ratify the Constitution before it could become the official law of the land. And some of the states were hesitating. And so several of these Federalists decided to write some papers that would support the Constitution and give a defense for ratification of the Constitution. And these famous men, you've probably heard of at least one or two of them. They wrote these Federalist Papers originally as anonymous. They put them under the name of Publius. Well, That didn't really mean anything. It was an old Roman general, but they put them anonymously under the name Publius. The actual people who wrote them were Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. And as I mentioned before, the Federalist Papers were important because they helped convince the people living in the states that had not ratified the Constitution yet. It helped convince them that the Constitution was a good thing and was worth ratifying. The next thing that happened was some of the states and the representatives said, you know what, we just aren't comfortable with this Constitution and we can't ratify it unless there is a provision written in there for a Citizens' Bill of Rights. And a Citizens' Bill of Rights that would include things that would be rights of all American citizens. And so they wrote, the framers of the Constitution wrote 10 amendments to the Constitution, the very first 10 amendments. Now, today, we have had 27 amendments to the Constitution since those original first 10. So those first 10 were written in 1789 or so. And since then, it's been hundreds of years, and there's only been 16 additional amendments since then. And the first 10 amendments to the Constitution are intended to protect your rights as an American citizen. They include things like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the right to bear arms, the right protections against illegal searches and seizures by the government. And we're going to talk more about the Bill of Rights in the weeks to come. But for now, just understand and note that the Bill of Rights was part of a deal that the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists struck in order to get the Constitution to be passed and ratified. And the Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution that provide for individual protections and rights for American citizens. So, the last thing we're going to look at today is the 6 big ideas of the Constitution. These are kind of like vocab words, but things that are important to note because these are the big ideas that are part of the Constitution. Some of them we've already talked about, and it's just going to be review, and a couple of them will be new as well. Number 1 is the idea of limited government. Limited government means that the government should only be involved in people's everyday lives as little as possible. Okay? Only when absolutely necessary should the government be involved in your life every day. That's the idea of limited government. The second idea is republicanism. And republicanism is the idea that the president and Congress represent the ideas of the people rather than the people representing the ideas of the president or the king. This is what we had under Great Britain. We did not have republicanism. We had the people represented the king's ideas. But in our new republic in the United States of America, the president and the Congress are supposed to represent our ideas as the people. Okay, our third big idea is called checks and balances, and we've talked about this quite a bit already, but each branch of government has some power over the other branches in order to avoid the abuse of power by one particular branch. Okay, number 4 big idea is federalism. We've talked about this as well, but federalism is the sharing of power between a central government and the states that make up that country. So in this case, in our country today, that central government is located in Washington, D.C. In our country in 1789, at the time of the Constitution, that central government was located in Philadelphia. Number 5 big idea is the idea of separation of powers. And separation of powers can go along with checks and balances. So you may want to kind of think about number 3 and 5 as kind of going together. Separation of powers means that you assign specific powers to each branch of government so that no one branch of government can be in charge of everything. That's why the executive branch executes the laws or enforces the laws, the legislative branch makes the laws, and the judicial branch interprets the laws. And so each branch has specific powers so that not one branch can become more powerful than the others. And finally, number 6 is the idea of popular sovereignty. And popular sovereignty is the idea that political authority belongs to the people. The people should get to make the decisions. And so if you want to compare, like we compared checks and balances and separation of power, 3 and 5, number 2, republicanism, And number 6, popular sovereignty, can also go together because they are very close in their meaning. Popular sovereignty being the idea that political authority belongs to people. The people get to make decisions about what's best for them. And republicanism is the idea that the king, or in this case, a president for us, should basically be reflecting the ideas of the people. The president and the Congress represent the ideas of what we as the people want them to do. So that's it for the Constitution. That wraps up our Constitution PowerPoint. What I'd like you to do now is go ahead and take the quiz that goes along with this, and that's going to lead us into next week, where we end up talking about the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, which is the Bill of Rights.